Our next speaker is Mr. Esben Poulsson, gentleman on my right, the president of the Singaporean Shipowners Association, and he will speak on the emergence of Asia as a major force in shipping. Mr. Poulsson, please.
Thank you very much. And to Mr. Francesco Lauro, thank you very much indeed for inviting me here. I have to say I've been at a lot of conferences around the world, but I have never been in a venue as beautiful as this. And it puts into context how young Singapore is. The nation was established by the British in 1819 and became a republic some years later, and has only in August this year celebrated its 50th anniversary as a country. So in the context of this setting, I think that shows you that we are just a baby historically. But my speech is rather long, and therefore I'm going to abbreviate it, because I think that the most important thing really is to try and put a little bit of perspective in how it is that Asia has become such a major force in shipping, and in particular even in ship owning, within a period of about 40 to 50 years, during which this impact has been tremendous. I've been in shipping myself, as the color of my hair probably indicates, for 44 years, of which I have spent 38 of that time in Asia, principally in Hong Kong and Singapore. But I think the one event that may, to my mind, sort of heralds the real onset of ship owning on an international scale in Asia was the fact that in 1949 China fell to the communists, and in advance of that happening, quite a number of Shanghai families had invested in ships as really floating assets to get their assets out of China in the expectations of things going the wrong way. And indeed, many of these people went to Hong Kong, and which at that time was a sleepy little colony with a population of about 1 million people. The population tripled within a number of years, and these entrepreneurs came to the city and began investing in ships more and more. And actually what then happened was that post-Japan, 1945, post-war, the Japanese required shipping capacity, but had the problem of very, very high costs in relative terms. So the ingenious idea of the so-called Shikumisan deal came about, whereby a trading house would promote a particular ship to a Hong Kong owner. That owner in turn would charter to a Japanese operator of good standing, and such deals were easily financeable by international banks, mainly in Hong Kong. And in the space of really no more than 20 or 30 years, Hong Kong became a massive ship-owning center with a fleet of about 70 million tons deadweight by the end of the 1980s. And it's really on this model that companies that you would have heard of today, BW Group, the previous Bergeson Worldwide, Valles, TCC, Hua Kong, and many others were built. Concurrently, the containerization was beginning very actively in companies like Evergreen, OOCL, followed later on by many Chinese and Korean lines were to follow. At the same time, as already mentioned by John, the advent of the Asian seafarer, the Filipino seafarer really only came into prominence probably in the late 60s, and by today, as most of you would know, more than 30% of the world's seafarer comes from the Philippines. Originally, they used to serve mainly as ratings, but as the years have gone by and as many European European owners have invested in training facilities in the Philippines, they have moved up in rankings, and today it's not uncommon to see ships crewed entirely by Filipinos. Today, of course, we also see new areas coming into this play, which is countries like Myanmar, where I think a number of owners in this room probably have already had some good experience. The growth of China then, of course, has been a huge impact, really not just in Asia, but in the world, with I think between the period of 1998 to 2008, China added 1 billion tons of seaborne cargo, representing something like 60% of global seaborne trade. The numbers are quite staggering to think that China at one point pre-2008 was producing up to 50 million tons of steel per month. Going on from that, the shipbuilders then as John has again referred to, the shipbuilders started up. And if you take a shipyard like Hyundai, for example, to think that they only built their very first ship in 1974, 41 years ago, is incredible when you think that today their combined yards are capable of producing more than 300 vessels annually. This was followed, of course, by Daewoo, Samsung, and the others, all of whom are now operating, I would say, at the high end of the chain, so much so that these companies are today shifting part of their production to Vietnam and the Philippines to find lower cost production. China itself, meanwhile, became a big exporter in about the late 1980s, and today controls roughly 40 to 42% of the world shipbuilding market. We already touched on the question of container lines and container ports. Today, 8 of the world's 10 largest container ports are located in Asia, and 90% of the world's shipbuilding takes place in Asia. A related topic, I think, that is maybe overlooked a little bit is the tremendous growth in inter-Asian trade, quite aside from East-West trades. The International Monetary Fund has projected that trade volumes in Asia will increase by about 9,000 annually through until 2016, significantly higher than the now currently dropping world growth of about 5%. Container volumes in the Asia-Europe routes are expected to grow by about 4% through to 2016, while inter-Asia over 6%. Focusing then a little bit more on Singapore, which is as you know, where I'm from. There was a survey done by a Norwegian firm called Menon, a Norwegian survey firm. This was done earlier this year when they measured 12 international maritime centers on 4 different premises in terms of what these centers offered to the shipowning community. And I'm happy to say that Singapore came out number 1. But in one area, it particularly scored highly in an Asian context, which is in the matter of law. Now, since this conference is about shipping and law, I think the one thing that is very, very important to underline is that it isn't, in my opinion, no accident that Hong Kong and Singapore are the 2 most prominent shipping centers of Asia today. And I put this down very largely to the fact that they enjoy robust, properly implemented, enforceable legal systems in which the international community can have confidence. And it is, to me, again, no accident that more than 130 international shipping groups have located in Singapore. And as I say, I put this down very much to the confidence that the community has, not only in the legal system, but in the way that the government does things in Singapore. We do not have what I call moving goalposts. Policy doesn't change unilaterally or when you least expect it. Policy is very consistent and is strictly enforced, but everybody knows where they stand. Our regulators listen very carefully to our concerns. We don't always get our way, but I think we often are able to influence our regulators' line of thinking and in turn represent our views in the international stage at IMO and ICS and elsewhere. I think the importance of long-term strategic planning is really there for all to see. In the case of Singapore, the scheme that they currently have, an approved international shipping scheme, was started in 1989, and it was implemented slowly but surely over the years. And as I said earlier, more than 130 companies, including many corporate holding companies, head offices and so on, have moved to Singapore. This in turn has spurred a great growth in related services, legal, shipbroking, insurance, and so on, and more recently in arbitration, where I spoke to somebody earlier this morning about the efforts being made in making Singapore an arbitration center. After all, many disputes involve two Asian parties. It's therefore totally logical to have the arbitration in Singapore. I believe that it's done well. I think it's cost effective, and the selling point is apparently that it is a little quicker than it may be in London, although it is still very small when compared to London. We also this year formed the Singapore War Risk Mutual and have already entered more than 300 vessels in this effort. This is again part of increasing the services that Singapore can offer to the international community, shipping community, in order that we can continue to be relevant and a good place to do business. We also invest very heavily in our people. The government of Singapore have invested more than $100 million since 2002, affecting about 20,000 aspiring students to enter our industry. We work very hard on trying to improve the image of our industry, to compete for the brains that are available and to make our industry more attractive. And I think with initiatives such as the recently launched Skills Future project, this is leading to some success, and I think will also benefit those international owners who have relocated to Singapore. The shipping industry in Singapore is about 7% of the GDP, employing about 180,000 people. We have in the port of Singapore about 140,000 port calls a year, handling about 33.9 million TEU, placing us second to Shanghai. I think looking forward, I believe that Singapore and Hong Kong will remain important centers of shipping in Asia. I think Shanghai, provided they in turn can improve their legal system, will be a factor in the future for sure, and I think that much is to be done there. I think one thing that Asians generally feel, and this was touched upon earlier, is the perception that our voice is not well heard on the international stage. I do put this down, and I say this to my colleagues in Singapore, this is a cultural thing. Asians are not great at speaking up. They are good at listening, they're good at talking, but not on the stage. And as one of our former presidents of our associations used to say, if you wish to be heard, you must speak. And I think this is just stating the obvious. I think that in closing, I would like to say that it's important for European shipping nations not to despair completely about the apparent great shift to Asia. I think the one thing that is very overlooked, and one thing that was touched upon at European Shipping Week in March in Brussels this year, was the very healthy state of European innovation. If you look at new ideas, new designs, new concepts for shipping, my perception is they are largely European originated. And this is something that one should not overlook, and this is something one should nurture from a European point of view. And finally, I think also that in terms of shipping centers, there will be numerous shipping centers in the world going forward. They will not all be in Asia. Europe, I believe, will adapt, will change, and will become more flexible. And I see there being 4 or 5, maybe 6 major European shipping centers in the world, interconnected, and focusing on the things that they do best. And I have absolutely no doubt that some of these will be European-based. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Poulsson. The shifting emphasis towards Asia was mentioned yesterday, and of course the emergence of Asia as a major force in shipping is there to be recognized by anybody, with Shanghai, Hong Kong and Singapore having become major container ship hubs. And of course this is an indication of how democratic we are in this continent, in that we brought someone from Asia to speak to us about Singapore becoming a major arbitration center, establishing a war risk mutual, and all the rest. And as to shipping being Eurocentric, and to that extent IMO being Eurocentric, Yannis Liras had a pertinent point to make. So once again, thank you very much, and good luck with Asia's aspirations to lead the world in shipping. We'll see.